Hi, I'm Jeremy Kirk with Intel 471, and this is Studio 471, our regular video podcast on cyber threat intelligence and cybersecurity. While most countries have retired checks as a financial instrument, billions of checks are still written in the US every year. This has proved to be a boon for fraudsters. There's an entire underground industry dedicated to stealing and then monetizing stolen checks, and it causes financial institutions a whole lot of headaches. With me today to talk about this is Eric Huber. Eric is a cybercrime research leader at TD Bank. Thanks a lot for joining me, Eric.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So there's an international audience that watches this podcast. So I think we should first address the big question for anybody, going to watch this about checks is that why are checks so widely used in the US still?
So keep in mind, we're a really large economy and things don't move quickly here. And so we have over 330 million people. We have over 4,000 banks. And so checks have been a popular payment system here in the US since the best I can tell, the first it was used is like in the 17th century. So I joke, it's like I'm a 21st century cybercrime researcher. The amount of time I've had to spend on these grubby little pieces of paper is sadly astonishing. And so it's a lot of it's inertia. Some of it's generational, because older generations, if you grew up in a time when 90% of the payments was checks and they work for you, you're going to keep using that. Some of it is certain industries like to use checks. I know the construction industry likes to do things by checks. And so there's different reasons that sometimes accounting folks like to use them. You write a check for something and the money's still in your account until it gets pulled out, so you get to keep the money for a while. And so there's a lot of different reasons why there's inertia, but the biggest thing is it's just really hard for a nation as big as we are and an economy as complex as we are to change. And the
Yeah.
numbers are going down, which is great. And there's more alternatives, faster payment rails. And so like younger generations, there are kids that have not written checks and may never write checks, right? Because they're so used to doing things digitally and there's so many different alternatives. But it's going to take a while before we get to the point where people sort of forget about them like they are in other countries.
Yeah, yeah. And let's talk about the scope of the check fraud problem. So, how much does check fraud cost financial institutions these days?
It's a lot. It's funny when I was preparing for the this particular interview. It's like, well, let me see what the losses are, and the numbers I were seeing were things like 20 billion, 24 billion. So the losses are tens of billions, and so the statistics are the usage is coming down, but the losses are still really high, and which is the reason why we're talking about this particular problem is because the bad guys have figured out it's a great payment rail to exploit.
And so, it's been around for more than 100 years. How has this evolved into the online age? Because like in the old days, they would just kind of fabricate checks and take it to it. And
Right.
that still happens somewhat today, but there are a lot of twists to it. Can you go into some of
Rawr.
those, how it's
So
changed?
there's a whole backstory on U.S. check fraud, and so a couple things happened at the same time. And the street level gangs were the ones now that have really figured out that check fraud is awesome because they're innovative and they're smart and they're looking for money. And they figured out two different things. One is the actual check payment rail. And when I say payment rail, it's what bank nerds say. It's just a payment system. So wire is a payment rail, automated clearinghouse payment rail. And so this check is one of the payment systems we use in the US, and it's just not, it's paper. I mean, it's just paper moving around and people are writing pieces of paper. And they figured out that system was vulnerable. And they also figured out the way that checks are moving around, which is generally through the US postal system, is also vulnerable. And the way that manifested themselves is they have figured out that they can steal mail. And so the first thing they do is like they know checks are in the mail. They know they want the checks, so they're going to go after the mail. And they go after the mail a couple different ways. One is they like just break into mailboxes. And so here in the United States, we have these blue collection boxes, which are ubiquitous. And if you're here in the US, you've seen them all over the place. Those are opened up with what are called arrow keys, which are the particular type of keys that the postal employees use to open up a container. These keys will also open up containers at places like apartment complexes, and the keys are localized to a certain area. One key doesn't open up everything in the country. It opens up at a certain area. And so they figured out if they can get those keys, either by buying them off of a postal employee or in many cases doing an armed robbery of that postal employee, they'll have the keys. They'll also work with insiders. They'll recruit insiders inside the post office to get them what they need. And then they start harvesting the mail and they start harvesting the checks. And then once you've got this piece of paper, then they kind of go on to their next phase, which is okay, we've got the check. Now, what are we going to do with it? And I know we'll talk about the ecosystem, but there's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah, when I was doing research, like we recently did a blog on check fraud, and I did a bunch of research into it. And the U.S. Postal Service said that between October 2021 and October 2022, there were 412 mail carriers who were robbed on duty,
Yes.
which I found absolutely shocking. And yeah, those the arrow keys that you referred to, I had a look in our intelligence collection because we scraped the forums, and there indeed
Yes.
were threat actors talking about, I got keys, right?
Yep.
In related to mail fraud, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I guess also in that piece, it's kind of pretty easy, if you have access to mail to figure out if there's a check inside of it, like U.S.
Correct.
Treasury checks come in an envelope that's a standard envelope that you can see the check through the clear
Very
window.
helpful.
Yeah, which
Yes.
is really helpful. You're like, well,
Yeah.
I know
Very
I've got this
convenient.
check.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess that's one thing we should talk about too is that there's different levels of sought after checks to steal too,
Yep.
and U.S. Treasury checks are one of the most sought after kinds. And can you explain why that's the case?
Yeah. It's a once they have the checks, they want to know how are we going to monetize them? How are we going to make money off those? And so one of the things that they've figured out is how the banks work when it comes to making funds available. And so they know that if you write a personal check, you take it to your bank, you deposit it, that bank is going to hold it for, it depends on the bank and how they're doing it, but they may hold it for a week or so before the funds are available. That gives the bank time, they hope, to figure out whether it's a good check or a bad check. The time doesn't always solve that issue, but it gives them time to work on it and see if they think a check is bad or if it's going to come back as bad. They know that official checks, like treasury checks, the way the regulations work here in the US is banks need to make those funds available right away or very close to after they've been deposited. It's basically,
Mm,
next day availability unless something allows us to hold it. So they know the clock is running. The other thing is the stimulus checks. They're called stimmies. If you go on online, they'll say they're stimmies. And it became that was COVID was the World Cup of fraud, and so the fraudsters learned so much in that. And so the U.S. Treasury is sending checks out all the time,
mm.
but there was just a big tranche of them went out during COVID, and so those were the stimulus checks. So it's just like everything's a stimmy, whether it's a stimulus check or not. And the issue is it's the same format, so they got really good at counterfeiting it. And then one of the issues, if you're a check fraudster, is like, okay, I've got this check. I've stolen it into the mail. I have the check. It's for $50. That is not worth as much to a fraudster as a $5,000 check. The reason is it's like you've got this check. It's $50. There's probably $50 in the account. If there's 5,000, there's $5,000 in the account. So you have a better chance of having more money in there. So if you have your $50 check, and let's say you altered it, it's like, okay, I'm going to deposit this for 500. Well, money may not even be in there, and so it may return really quickly. So you've wasted your time. With the government, the money's there. So
Yeah.
it's like whatever's in there, and usually those are pretty big checks anyway. And so there's a lot of different reasons why they like them. And one of the good things that have happened recently is the federal government's moving away from those paper checks now. Now they're moving to a system where it's going to be, I think it's going to be more debit cards, and they start moving more towards electronic payments because the federal government realizes there's a lot of fraud. And so, in their
Yeah.
defense and to their credit, they're actually taking action on it. And so, there's a lot of different pieces moving right now in the industry, both with government and law enforcement and banks, that we're all doing to try and get the problem under control. And
Yeah.
that's one
Yeah.
of it. That's really welcome.
I guess it's always the legacy problem too, because there's people of a certain age who, may not be
It's
as
generational.
aware,
Yep.
generational. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Let's go back to the terminology of check fraud
Sure.
because I found this super fascinating. And we should also say, and maybe you can explain this as well, is that you've created a fraudster glossary, which is a really interesting document because when you go and you start to look I guess at some of the forums and start looking at some of the discussions around fraud. There's a whole bunch of terminology, and honestly, you don't understand it unless you kind of been told. But you mentioned
Right.
one, which is stimmy. That's a stimulus check. What are some of the other terms that are used around check fraud to kind of like it's sort of
Oh yeah. No,
euphemisms for
it's
things?
this no, it's this whole specialized thing. So when I started doing this research, I had no earthly clue what they were saying, and it took a while to figure out through a lot of research and just context, because Urban Dictionary only gets you so far when it comes to slang. In fact, they use, of course, common slang. Most of the people doing the check stuff are going to be, I don't know, like 20s or 30s, so it's younger folks. But the um, the language they're using is very specialized to the fraudster industry, and so you'll see terms like slips and grub, which are just terms for checks, and then you'll see things like uppy. It's like, what's uppy? Well, uppy is an upload. And so what you'll see things like, uppy coming soon. It's like, all right, somebody went out and stole a bunch of mail, and now they're going to upload those checks on Telegram because they're going to offer those checks for sale because there's differentiation in the industry when it comes to who does what. And certain people are focusing on stealing checks, other people are focusing on opening accounts and doing deposits. So there's this whole ecosystem there. And you'll see one of the dreaded terms that everyone has is any, right, which is insider. And someone will say,
Oh
hey,
yeah.
I need an account for this particular bank because I have an any. Well, that means they have an insider sitting at that particular bank, or they have an insider at the postal service, or they have an insider at like a wireless provider that they are going to use that insider to advance whatever check fraud or any other fraud attack that they're going to do um, to get it done.
So I want to read to you a kind of something that you might see on Telegram when a check is sold, and maybe you can translate it for me with your knowledge of these
Sure.
terms. And so it's quote unquote, just popped off again, the same September grub. There's two
Yep.
emojis for a red siren, and then it says 3PT.
Yep.
What does that mean?
Yep. Welcome to my heck. Enjoy your stay. This was me years ago, where it's like, I don't know what they're saying. Now, so what they're saying is they get really excited. So the thing of it is there's a high failure rate because we're playing defense. The banks are playing defense. It's really accuracy by volume. So they really have to try things over and over. And so they get super excited when something works and like really excited when something works several times in a row. So September Grub, they're talking about, it's like, all right, that's probably some mail that he stole in September or he bought it in September and he tries to put it on either a particular bank or even a particular account. And it worked like three times in a row. And so 3P is like three-peat. And so that's when he's saying it's like, I'm really onto something. And then you'll start seeing discussions between the fraudsters saying, what did you do? And so some of these channels are very collaborative when they're talking about, look, if I put this check on this bank, is this going to work? And different combination of things that they're trying to figure out and they're trying to communicate. And so they get just really ultra excited. And so when you're a bank, you don't want to see it's like, oh gosh, they repeat on our bank. So if
Yeah.
you're, doing research on that sort of thing, you're watching it. And there's also, it's not a well-kept state secret. There's lots of us on Telegram looking for this sort of thing. And so this is the
Yeah.
sort of thing that we look for. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this because this is a whole cybercrime as a service ecosystem, right? And let's talk
Yeah.
about the role of Telegram because if you go on
Yes.
Telegram and you start using these terms, you eventually stumble across some of these channels and you'll see, the kind of typical check fraud photo, which is somebody's leg in a car with
Yeah,
three
yeah, yeah, yeah. It really is the
with
classic, isn't it?
with
You've
three
been on Telegram. Yeah, yeah.
with three
It's
checks laid
funny.
out, right?
Yeah,
And this is like usually the checks, the account number and the routing number are obscured because that is the data that you would need to
right,
basically link it to an account. But tell
right.
me how this works from when the check is stolen, how it's sold, and then what are the actors down the line who are either physically buying the checks, or more than likely than not buying the
Yeah,
images of the checks
yeah.
without those redactions. How does that work?
Yeah, no, that's funny. So the ecosystem that you're seeing is part advertising, part bragging. And so here's the way it works. And there's different people that do different things, and some people that try to be one man or one woman stores as much as possible. But I really do see that it's division of labor. And so you have people that are focusing on getting the checks, and they're the ones out there that are stealing the checks, working with insiders, getting the checks. Once they have the checks, they're going to keep the ones that they want. And then for the surplus, they're going to go ahead and sell. And so what you'll see that a lot is on Telegram, which is, getting back to our last conversation, someone will go out and they'll steal stuff. And sometimes they're putting photos of them like bags of mail in the car, right? So it's like, okay, let's wait. And by the morning, they're going to be posting the uppies, the uploads, where the images of the checks will go up there. They will block the accounts because they don't want to obviously give the accounts away because then you could make your own check. They don't want to do that. And they're going to offer those up for sale. And so they're going to be doing the deposits on what they have. They're going to be selling what they have. And you've got other people that maybe they're not stealing mail, but they want to do deposits or they have accounts that they want to do stuff in. They're going to be buying those checks. And so other people are focusing on accounts. They are running around and they are recruiting people to use their accounts at banks, or they are opening up accounts, or they are buying accounts that have been opened up. Their thing is accounts, and so the general business transaction is someone's going to have a check, someone's going to have an account, and they're going to get together on Telegram and they're going to make a deal as far as how they're going to do this and get the check and the debit card into the hands of whoever needs to do the deposit. And generally, the it's going to be 50-50 is the cut, maybe 60-40, 50-50. It just sort of depends. And then you've got all sorts of other people that are offering how to make counterfeits and alter those checks and then teach you how to do all those. And so we can certainly talk about that portion of it also.
Yeah, because that's the thing is like if you buy the check, okay, I've got the account number, I've got the routing number. Now I need to kind of make a fake check, right? I need to put
Yeah.
my name on it or the name of my money mule. And then, sometimes the physical checks are actually altered through, kind of
Yes.
acid washes and things as
Yes.
well. So yeah, explain, and this is where we should talk about another funny term that we see in this ecosystem, which is cooking. What's cooking the
Yes.
check?
Yeah. No, cooking and labbing. It's funny. It's like I'm trying to pause so I don't totally monologue on you, but you can see how, do conference presentations. I could talk for like 45 minutes an hour on this straight. Um, y- that is part, you've got your check. And now what are you going to do with your check? And so there's basically two routes you're going to take. One is you're going to counterfeit it, which is you'll see people, I'm in the lab right now. And when someone says I'm in the lab right now, it means I'm at home, I'm sitting in front of my computer, Photoshop is up and ready, and I'm ready to, if you have something that you need done, I will do a counterfeit for you. So I will take that original check, I'll put it into Photoshop, I will, alter it however you want to alter it. It's interesting, sometimes when you see the prices, you'll see different prices for it's like if you want a PDF, you pay this much. If you want me to send you a physical check, you will pay more. And the reason is you can take a PDF of a counterfeit check and you can just do a mobile deposit. You don't have to have that physical check. You can do a mobile deposit. If you want something to walk into a bank physically, then someone's going to ship it. And ironically, they tend to use the postal inspect or the postal service to do that, which is it's like you're the ones that are making this problem, and you're still using the postal service.
Yeah.
Um, and then there is the things that like the washing, and so that's actually um, taking a check, and you physically have the check, and you physically have the ink on it. And what you're going to do is you're going to get a chemical. And I don't want to say what the chemicals are, although it's not difficult to figure it out. These are easily obtained chemicals. You're going to put that in a container. You're going to take the check. You're going to soak it in there, and then you're going to remove the ink, the payee, and you're going to put in as best you can to make it look like everything else. You're going to put a new payee in there. You may also decide that you want to change the amount on that check, but you're taking a risk. And like we talked about before, if you change that $50 check to a $500 check, maybe the money's not there and it comes back pretty quickly. So one of the things sometimes they will do if they're really enterprising is they will try and call the bank and try and pretend to be the person who wrote the check and see if they can figure out how much money's on that account.
Oh, right.
So it depends on how much work they want to do. I don't see that a lot because there's so many checks out there. I don't think necessarily you have to do it, but I have seen it before. And so
Yeah.
it just sort of depends on what they want to do. So once you've got that check, you're either going to counterfeit it, you're going to wash it, and then you're going to maybe have someone walk it into a bank for you, which is why you see the term walker all the time.
Mm,
Or and you will see sometimes that the bad guy will just go to an ATM and deposit it and take their
yeah.
chances. And so it just
Yeah.
depends on what they want to do.
I saw some banks with mobile deposits. They usually limit the amount of those, the top end of those checks
Which is why it's
that
not as
can be.
popular with them. Yeah, because you can only banks you can only there's limits on how much you can do mobile. They absolutely do use mobile, but they prefer to do physical because they know you can put more into an account than with mobile.
Yeah. And so, what are the challenges then in detecting these checks? I know that, like, I mean, the checks themselves have all kinds of holograms and things, but I also noticed that it's possible to buy check stock.
The issue is this is a paper-based payment rail in an advanced technological environment where you have just magnificent scanners and printers, and you can just easily get whatever you need on Amazon as far as you can buy check stock on Amazon. But in the ecosystem, they will sell you whatever you need to do to replicate anything that you need. And so because of that, it's very difficult for to do like physical defenses against check fraud. There's
Mm,
things you can do like using like different types of ink. I've seen. I'm not an expert on this. Things you can do to make things harder to counterfeit, or excuse me, harder to do the washing that we talked about. But the counterfeiting is just a matter of scanning it, getting it into Photoshop, and going to work. And then putting it on, realistic feeling and looking paper is not
yeah,
particularly difficult. So you can put that in there, and the poor teller has this no chance, unless
sure.
it's a really crude thing. And tellers are great, and talk to any fraud department. Tellers are your first line of defense, and they have great spider senses. But there's only so much in this environment where the technology is just so great.
Yeah. And so, what do you recommend for banks to? I guess there's kind of a false positive here, right? Like banks want to obviously keep their customers happy,
Yeah,
don't want to hold up checks, right?
yeah,
For fear of a false positive. So, is there some of
correct.
that pressure there then too?
Absolutely.
Like
No,
it,
it's
mm,
our priority is our customers, right? And that's
yeah.
always going to be the case. And as a fraud fighter, I totally respect that, and that's my job is secure enablement, and so totally get that. And so the industry as a whole here in the U.S., they will hold checks for a certain amount of time, like we talked about before. But there's certain things that have to be next day availability, right? Those official
Mm,
checks. And so it is what the banks do is it's just any other problem that you have, or it's the combination of people and processes and technology. And so having, we all have like really great check folks. Like I just they're really good at what they do. Part of it is volume too, which is there's so much coming in, and you have to make
absolutely.
sure that
Yeah.
the priority is always making sure that the customers have a good experience. And so it's a balance between that and making sure that you're serving your customers.
And how do you leverage cyber threat intelligence then too? Is that
Oh
helpful, I
yeah.
guess, in
No, it's
understanding
it's
fraud rings? Yeah.
absolutely no, because the threat intelligence is it's a key piece of protecting any organization, which is like what's going on out there. And so part of this,
Mm,
what we're doing here is like we're educating people and other financial institutions on what's going on. So understanding um, what is being said about your financial institution and your customers, out on the underground economy, so you understand the threat, and then keeping up on, whatever the latest intelligence is on whatever fraud threats are going on, so that you can educate your folks internally, having good persistent detection technology and experts, and having just all the different pieces of the puzzle that are coming in there, and not one thing's going to solve the problem, but it's just putting as much friction as you can on the bad guys, both with your institution, and we do a lot of collaboration in the industry. I mean, there's one of the things we say is like there's of course there's competition when it comes to business and customers and that sort of thing, but when it comes to fraud fighting, there's a lot of collaboration and we share a lot
Yeah.
of information and there's a lot of collegiality because we all have the same problem and we're all fighting the same bad guys. And so it's collectively we are defending our institutions and defending our customers and collaborating with other institutions. We're just helping making everything better for everyone else, which benefits our customers in the end anyway.
And as a final question, I just wanted to ask what your prediction for this type of fraud is, in the next few years. I think you probably already answered the second part of the question, which is kind of what are there any innovations on the horizon that might increase the chances of catching it? But what do you think we're going to see?
I, it, Here in the US, the trend is still going to be down on checks, which is good. It's going to be a long time. I mean, my lifetime, there's still going to be checks, just because it's just such a popular way to do payments here in the US, and it just takes us such a long time to change, which is fine. But there's a bunch of things that are helping. One is there's so much cool payment technology out there as far as smarter, faster payments, that sort of thing. We've got, RTP, which is our one of the two payment rails we have here, along with FedNow. Not to get like totally nerdy on our payment rails here, but we've got very quick payment rails that you can now build things on. Venmo and PayPal and
Yes.
Zelle and all these different ways that you can pay electronically and very quickly and move money around. So I think that's going to help. More understanding of the threat and more education like this. We tell businesses if you can move away from checks, great. If you're a commercial client with a bank, have a discussion with your bank on it's like, how should I be doing payments and what's the best way to do payments? And if I'm
Yeah.
going to do check, there's things like positive pay that you can do. And the executive summary of positive pay is it's a very common way to protect yourself from banks here in the US. And you basically give your bank, it's like, here's the list of checks that I'm writing. If it's not on this list, it's not a good check. And there's different variations on it. But you have to do the list. So it's not something that consumers do, but businesses certainly do. And it's a great
Yeah.
way to do it. If you are going to send a check, things like put it in FedEx or UPS. If it's like some large dollar check, there's ways that you can do it, or like registered through the US mail. So there's ways to educate. The AI is a thing, right? It's not a hype. There's all sorts of AI assisted technology out there that is coming up in the fraud world that looks really promising, that will help banks do things quicker and more efficient and just make our check fraud Jedis more efficient. And so there's more technology that we can throw at it, which is kind of cool because usually with fraud, the concern is like, oh, the bad guys are going to have AI, so we're going to have AI, and it's going to be our AI versus their AI.
Yes.
But the good news is, it's like, no, we're going to be one sitting here with AI. The bad guys are still going to be using Photoshop and check washing and that sort of stuff. So it's like, all right, I think we're going to have an advantage here. So I'm not saying it's not going to eliminate the problem, but it's actually going to get better on our end as far as what we can do. And then things like, the government here, the U.S. government's done a great thing. It's like, hey, you're right, banks. We recognize putting all these checks in the mail is not a good idea. So we'll start we'll start reducing that. So everyone's coming together. Um,
Yeah.
the, for those who don't know, in the U.S., we actually have a law enforcement agency. Actually, have two law enforcement agencies that are dedicated to postal law enforcement. We have the United States Postal Inspection Service, who are incredible, and they are going after these bad guys aggressively. There's other law enforcement agencies going after them also, FBI and a bunch of other ones that will get involved depending on the circumstance. And then there's also the other postal law enforcement agency we have here. It's the United States Postal Service's Office of the Inspector General, and they
Okay.
are a federal law enforcement agency, just like any other federal law enforcement agency. They have special agents with, they carry guns and badges and full law enforcement authority. They're the ones that are actually policing inside of the Postal Service, looking for insiders and when bad guys use insiders in there. And so both those agencies are very aggressive in going after the problem. So just all sorts of different pieces coming together, all sorts of collaboration coming together, all sorts of technology that's coming there. Where I'm not saying we're going to wipe out the problem, but this is one of the fraud areas where it feels like we can really start turning the tide.
Sounds good. Well, Eric Huber, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. No, thank you very much for having me.